Reaction to the EU's decision to impose an oil embargo on Iran.
Yes, could this be a declaration of war? That's how The Guardian's diplomatic editor Julian Borger has headlined his blog today. Now, basically, Iran has said in the past that this would constitute a declaration of war if the EU decided to block all oil imports from Iran, and that they would then, of course, close the Straits of Hormuz, they threatened to do, which would block a lot of oil coming from the Gulf into Europe and, of course, send the price soaring up. Now, he describes that as a suicidal move for Iran if they were to close those straits, because the US would probably respond with military action. But he does say they've got lots of other ways to make life difficult for the West without necessarily going that far. They could, for example, mine the straits so that ships would be, might be hit mines and be blown up. They could attack oil bases of other Gulf Arab countries on the shores of that coast, or indeed they could use secret agents, perhaps to try and make the West's war in Afghanistan more difficult. He says they've got a number of well-placed and very capable agents and a very professional secret service that could do those things. So Iran, he says, could escalate tension in all sorts of ways after this.
So there could be all sorts of consequences, but do the papers actually support the decision?
Well, in here, the Times editorial, they think really that it was an excellent decision. It's headlined, sanctions are exactly what's needed to crack down on Iran's brutal and repressive regime. They say that nuclear power is one reason to have sanctions on Iran, but actually there are many more because the regime oppresses its own people. They talk, for example, of the famous case of the Iranian woman who was sentenced to death by stoning, about which the Times campaigned for months last year. But if we look at the New York Times former editor Bill Keller, he's written a piece for the paper saying that sanctions, in fact, will achieve nothing because the point of them supposedly is to bring Iran back to the bargaining table to get them to talk about nuclear power. But actually, and in the current electoral process in the US, it's unlikely that the Obama administration would actually agree to talk to Iran because that would make them look bad. It would make an easy attack point for any Republican opponent if they were to talk to Iran. And of course, if Benjamin Netanyahu's Israel were to decide to attack Iran on its own, because of the electoral process, the Obama administration would feel forced to go along with it. So effectively, this policy can't achieve anything.
Moving on now to the French Senate's controversial decision to criminalise denying the Armenian genocide. Our correspondent in Turkey was telling us earlier that the press is reacting, obviously, with a lot of anger.
Absolutely. If we look at the English language version of the Turkish paper Hurriyet, their front headline is Armenian motion hits Turkish-French relations. And inside they've got a strongly worded editorial that accuses France of attacking Islam and says that while Nicolas Sarkozy is still in power, there's no way that French-Turkish relations can be rebuilt. They do point out, interestingly, that the Ankara apparently has been informed that this law could be unconstitutional here in France, but they've opted not to try and fight it through legal means, rather to fight back with the loudest and most strongly worded public pronouncements that ministers can come up with, according to the paper. They also say there's a case that could bring this law before the European Court of Human Rights, because there's a man who was condemned in Switzerland for denying the Armenian genocide, and the European Human Rights Court decision wouldn't go in Turkey's favour. They might well decide that this actually was a genocide, in which case Turkey would be in trouble because they refused to acknowledge it.
Now, the Arab League has decided to extend its mission in Syria, but without the help of Saudi Arabia. And The Guardian says there's an underreported protest movement going on within Saudi Arabia.
Exactly, they're positioning themselves internationally as opposed to oppression in Syria. But The Guardian says a lot of foreign journalists have forgotten there's actually a number of demonstrations going on in Saudi Arabia itself where demonstrating is completely banned, particularly from the Shia minority. They say that 5 Shia young men were killed on the 16th of January in big demonstrations there, and that they're being strongly and brutally repressed by the Saudi Arabian regime, and most of us have forgotten about it.
And what have you got to finish off with the US election?
Very briefly, it's that campaign finance thorny topic that a lot of US papers are getting their teeth into today. This is because Newt Gingrich has picked up another $5 million in funding from a private donor that will be used for attack ads in Florida. Now, the New York Times has reports on this today saying that the amount of funding has gone up 130% just since the last election on Republican primary ads alone. And Obama's team also is fighting back. He apparently went to 3 sponsorship dinners in one night last week where people paid thousands of dollars for the privilege to have dinner with him. So he's going to be matching that Republican candidate's funding dollar for dollar.
Wow, it is amazing just how many dollars go into all of this. All right, thanks very much, Elena, for that look at the international press. You're watching live from Paris. A reminder now of our top stories. That vote could cause